Welcome. Today, I am going to show you how I did this street destruction in Blender, and I hope you like it. I started by scaling the default cube so it gives the form from a street. I added a particle system and set the end frame to 1 and set the settings to volume and random. After that, I used the cell fracture add-on to generate some big chunks. I deleted the particle system and placed the cube under the chunks and scaled it up. Done with that, I added an active rigid body to all the chunks with these settings. But I added a passive rigid body to the big cube and animated it so it moves forward. As you see, all the pieces are moving also forward, and that's not what I wanted, so I also added a passive rigid body to the end chunks so they don't move forward. The chunks moved to the side, so I built a block out for the sides so that the chunks are not moving. For a more realistic result, I calculated the mass with concrete as the type and connected the chunks. But I set the pattern to chain by distance. I selected all the constraints and checked the box breakable and disable collisions. Now the chunks stick a bit more together like they would in the real world. After I was done with the big chunks, I made a second layer with much smaller pieces for more detail. All things I did for the first layer, I also did for the second layer. The settings were just the same as the settings from the first layer, just that the pieces were much smaller and the breakable strength was different. And that looks pretty good, but I played with some settings until I was happy with the result. After I was done with changing the settings, I baked all the rigid body simulations so that I can add more detail without changing the simulation. Because the big chunks were clean on the sides, which is not really realistic, I subdivided the chunks and added a displacement modifier and made it only affects the sides. I copied the displacement modifier to all the chunks, and because I already baked the sim, I don't have to wait again for it to simulate. For even more detail, I used a sphere with a particle system and moved it along with the street destruction. But I don't want white points, so I made some simple rocks by using a sphere with displacement modifier and copied them 2 times for some variety. I changed the white spheres to rocks by going to the render tab in the particle system, setting it to collection and selecting the collection where I placed the rocks. After disabling the show emitter in render and viewport mode, it looked pretty nice. I made the block out invisible because I don't want them in the render and viewed it in render mode. But of course the textures are still missing, so I used 2 materials from Quixel Bridge and placed them on the pieces. All the assets and materials from Quixel are still free until the end of the year, so I recommend getting them now. I used the same material for the rocks as for the big chunks and small pieces, but changed the exposure a bit. And that's how I made this street destruction in Blender, and I think it looks pretty good. Let me know what you think, and if you like this video, please subscribe my channel and watch some other videos if you want. Bye.